during training how the military programs us as young teenagers to have such a bias and a disdain for people in the Middle East. For example, during training, our simulations, our urban operations, everything that we're doing is focused on people in the Middle East that wear traditional clothing, speak the Arab language. Oftentimes there are speakers with the Arab language playing in these simulations. And even targeting, our targets are of people who are male Arabs in the traditional clothing. And this is all what I'm recognizing is to program us to be able to deploy to the Middle East and be truly convinced that the people that we're seeing in these areas are terrorists or are the enemy, if you will, because now we're trained to believe this. And coming into the military at 18 years old, not really knowing anything about the Middle East, everything that I'm being told by my government and this institution, I'm trusting. Because, you know, the military in America is held to such a high standard. You are almost put on a pedestal once you join. And so I really didn't have any reason not to trust these institutions. But after about 8 or 9 years as a combat medic, I got a college degree and became an intelligence officer in 2013. And from here, I worked for several agencies, DIA, ODNI, and I was at NSA for almost 5 years. And there were several assignments that I had that involved the Middle East. The first being in 2017, where I did a habeas corpus writ contract for the detainees in Guantanamo Bay. And this was the first time that I really had experienced what my government was capable of doing when it came to how they treated detainees and human beings, really. It was my first experience viewing the inhumane treatment that my government was capable of.
And while you're in the military and this was sort of, if this is the right word, normalized,
yes.
What were you perceiving the outside world where there was demonstrations against the invasions of Middle Eastern countries? How were you seeing that at that time?
Well, honestly, during the invasion of Iraq and then, of course, Afghanistan, it was all of these protests were so censored, especially being in the military. I didn't even know that there was such a large dissent towards invading Iraq until most recently, becoming an activist because of the genocide in Palestine. I've met people who protested during this time as well, and veteran organizations who were created during this time, actually. But to be honest with you, had no idea that anyone in America was dissenting towards our invasion of Iraq.
So is there an effort on the part of the military to keep you insulated from what's happening in the public realm?
Right. I think there's not only an effort within the military and our government institutions, but it's an effort by the media, by our executive branch, legislative branch. I mean, even local state governments. I think every institution at this point has a level of corruption that keeps us censored to the truth and reality of what's actually happening.
Right. Looking back, do you feel that during your time in the military, the military itself was mostly invested in maintaining American dominance, perhaps informed by a racist or even colonial outlook, rather than protecting America itself?
Yeah, I think there are a few factors that I consider when thinking about our invasion of the Middle East, more specifically. And of course, there's Israel. Learning about how much Israel was involved in convincing our our legislative branch, if you will, to go to Iraq because of weapons of mass destruction really shocked me. I don't think that most Americans understand how much influence Israel had over our American government to invade Iraq. he came and testified in our Congress. Benjamin Netanyahu came and testified in our Congress saying that he was 100% sure that there was weapons of mass destruction inside of Iraq, which we all know now that was a complete lie. And so there's this factor that I'm witnessing that as we maneuver inside of the Middle East, I'm noticing that a lot of it has to do with the fact that Israel is the influencer over this. And then there's also the military-industrial complex, which is something that I'm learning more about. I work for Eisenhower Media Network, and President Eisenhower was someone who brought this to the forefront and said, if we continue down this path, our economic stability will be placed on the military-industrial complex. And we're witnessing this right now. And Representative Thomas Massie just recently made a statement about how we're pulling out of the war in Eastern Europe, but now starting to invest in a greater war in the Middle East again. And this is because there's an expectation of how much investment and spending we will have in America on weapons, on manufacturing weapons, on selling weapons, on using weapons, because this has become such a life cycle, implanted as a life cycle of our economy, that without this now, there would be an economic devastation. And so I think there are two factors in play here: imperialism, of course, a land grab by Israel in the Middle East. Anytime there's stability with a country in the Middle East that does not recognize Israel, then Israel tends to implement some sort of influence to destabilize the country, crash it economically, bring it back into impoverished conditions so that they don't have any influence. And so I think the factors here that I'm recognizing is there's twofold at play: the Israeli influence in the Middle East, and then also our military-industrial complex.
Perhaps you can link what your awakening was in terms of the American military not being what it says that it is, and your entering in earnest pro-Palestinian activism that you do so well today. Yes.
I come from a Republican background. In 2016, I was a supporter of Trump. My entire family was a supporter of Trump, over Hillary Clinton, of course. And as a Republican, one of the pillars that people do support and why they vote Republican is because of the defense budget. And so for my entire life, I always believed that it was necessary to have this defense budget, and this is why I always voted towards the right side of the aisle. I've noticed now that the reason we have this defense budget is not because we need to actually defend our borders. It's for us to be able to wage wars in other countries. And so this level of awakening tied back into my 17 years in the military and trying to recognize what I participated in, what my colleagues participated in, what people that I consider family and friends participated in who deployed to Iraq, who deployed to Afghanistan. And then I look at this and this awakening of how much my entire life has just been a lie. We don't need this defense budget to defend our country. We need this defense budget to fund the military-industrial complex and to wage war and death and destruction in other countries. And so October 7th really was that moment of awakening where I was watching the footage coming out of Gaza. I'm following these news media outlets from other countries at this point. And so I'm watching the real footage coming out and not the Western media footage. Fox News, CNN, even MSNBC, all of these news organizations have been censoring the truth. But I'm watching Al Jazeera, WION, Hinduism Times. I'm watching all this footage coming out of Gaza, and I immediately knew that this was not self-defense. This was not a military operation. I know that Israel has the best weapon systems. They have the ability to use precision guiding weapons. They can do urban operations. This is what we are trained to do in the military, where you go in with a team, take out a commander or a military operative, and then move out. None of this was happening. all I could see was bombs dropping absolutely everywhere on children, women, elderly, on hospitals. It was completely indiscriminate. And so by October 24th, I will never forget this day, I recognized that Israel was committing the genocide. And I also recognized that most of my life had been a lie.
I mean, how have people who know you from the military or within the government responded to your activism, especially because it's been so outspoken, to your credit?
Yeah, I've had I've had different responses from both my family, former colleagues, current colleagues. There's one side where I think people are so hesitant to accept the truth because of the amount of guilt, shame, and processing that has to take place. You imagine a soldier who's deployed to Iraq 2, maybe even 3 times, who's participated in war crimes, realistically is what happened, and now they have to internalize and accept that what they did was to innocent people. I think this is the hesitation that I get when it comes to speaking to former colleagues in the military, where they're not, psychologically prepared to accept that what they participated in were war crimes. And on behalf of the oligarchy, on behalf of the elites, on behalf of Israel. That's why we have 22 veteran suicides a day in America. And I anticipate that number will rise now that so many veterans are actually waking up to the truth. But I think that I continue conversations with these people. I don't want to push the issue so far to where they do end up, thinking about having suicidal ideations or self-harm. But I do continue having conversations with these people. And also offering support, because I'm internalizing what I participated in as well. I mobilized for Operation Enduring Freedom, and so there were missions that I participated in as well that I look back on and think, I think that those people may have been innocent, but we were told that they were guilty of participating in some terrorist organization. But I'm being accused of the same thing. So now I look back and think, were they actually guilty of something, or were they just dissenting against Israel and so therefore were categorized as a terrorist? And then there's the other side of the aisle that have come to this awakening as well as I have, and are wondering, what is our country doing? On an anyone that has this ability to look at this situation from the outside lens, from the bigger picture, from an international picture, we're watching BRICS grow. We're watching countries start to isolate America, start to isolate Israel. We're watching the global South align themselves together, both economically and security-wise. And what does that mean for my country? What does that mean for my children? What does that mean for my children's children in the future when we become such an isolated country that we fall as a global power? Because that's ultimately what's happening. The American empire is falling. And it's because we are providing this unwavering support towards Israel to expand and take over the resources and the land in the Middle East and control the Middle East, if you will. And so I do have colleagues that are even active duty now, or just recently got out of the military, friends who are really concerned about the direction that our government is going. There's a significant gap happening even on the Republican side, because Trump campaigned that we would not participate in war. He was going to bring peace at an international level. And now, just in the past 48 hours, they have slaughtered almost 1,000 people in Gaza with the approval of Trump. They are bombing Yemen. They are talking about resuming aid to Ukraine. So all of these campaign promises that were made are, not being fulfilled. And so, of course, there's a level of dissent happening even in the Republican Party.
Absolutely. I mean, how do you feel that veterans who are against war, veterans who are against Israeli aggression, criminality against Palestine, perhaps are uniquely positioned to do something activist-wise that perhaps segments of the other activist community may not be?
Yeah, I think as veterans, we have an interesting perspective because we were in what I've learned this term, the belly of the beast. We actually functioned in the war machine. We were a part of the machine of the American government that goes into these places in the Middle East, in Eastern Ukraine. We know Ukraine is a proxy war, of course. We were a part of this machine. And so we come from a place of having that actual experience of being someone who, in a way, at this time, was complicit in this war machine. And now we're realizing what we participated in, whether directly or indirectly, and we're speaking out against that, recognizing that it was wrong, recognizing that we cannot sustain our country by continuing to wage wars for almost 4 or 5 decades now in the Middle East, that it's not sustainable for our future. It's not sustainable for our children. And so for our economic future, our national security. And so for us, I think, it's so important that we use our voices because it's hard for the propaganda from the other side, from the enemy, if you will, to say that we're lying or to say that we don't know what we're talking about, because we know exactly what we're talking about. We literally participated in this.
Mm-hmm. And recently you had quite a troubling experience, if I can say, in Israel. I'm wondering if you can speak to that and describe what happened.
Yes. So several months ago, I decided to do a Christian pilgrimage into Israel, into the West Bank and occupied Israel. I no longer recognize Israel as a sovereign state. And I flew into Jordan, and then I was going to cross directly from Jordan into the West Bank. And I didn't realize, I was told that the Israeli occupation has a very difficult immigration and customs process, but I don't think I realized exactly what I was walking into. Upon exiting Jordan and going to enter into the West Bank, there's about a mile of electric fences, individuals with AR weapons, at least 3 checkpoints that your vehicle has to go through, where they're looking in your vehicle, checking your passport, and so you get through this area, and then you finally get to the Customs and Borders, where you're going to present your passport and explain what you're going to do inside of occupied Israel and Palestine. And so I make it finally to here, and I have my itinerary, my list of holy sites that I want to visit, and I present my passport, I present my itinerary, which has the hotels I'm going to stay at, everywhere I'm going to be. And he asked me, he says, so what are you doing here? And I present this. I said, well, basically, I'm coming on my Christian pilgrimage. And he looked up at me and he said, basically? And I said, yes. And for some reason, this word just threw him off. And so I get escorted to sit in an area and wait to be basically ask more questions. So during the next hour or two, I have 2 or 3 more people come ask me questions. What does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to visit the holy sites? And as someone who is born and raised a devout Catholic, currently practicing Catholic, of course these are easy questions for me to answer. And so I answer the questions, but I guess they are still not convinced. And so now they're going to detain me and interrogate me. So they take me to another area of this building. And meanwhile, there are no Palestinians here. Palestinian police, Palestinian authority, everything is controlled and operated by the Israeli occupation. And this is me trying to enter into Palestine. So I'm trying to enter into Palestine from the Jordan border, but everyone that I'm coming into contact with is the Israeli occupation, the Israeli government. And so and it's important to mention this because this is what an apartheid state is. There's no influence by Palestinians to be able to accept me into their country. It's all reliant on the approval or disapproval of the Israeli government. The Palestinians have no say-so if I could come into their country or not. So I go into this interrogation, and she starts asking me questions about my job. Of course, I tell her I was in the military. I'm not working right now. And then she asked what I did in the military, and I told her I was an intelligence officer. And she starts asking me about my assignments. And the questions got so detailed, I finally looked at her and I said, with all due respect, you should understand that I cannot answer these questions. You are forcing me to commit espionage against my country. You can't ask me details about my assignments inside of the NSA, inside of DIA. You can't ask me these questions. And because we're supposed to be allies, why would you be asking me to commit espionage against my country? And I had to say this 4 or 5 times to a point where we almost got into this sort of like conflict about what I was going to answer and what I wasn't. Then she wanted to go through my phone. And of course, I'm against this because for, the past 11, 12 years, I've been an intelligence officer. Of course, I have colleagues, friends who are in my phone contacts, people I'm having conversations with that are in the intelligence community. I can't give my phone to this foreign government who will, of course, download everything that's in my phone. And I tell her this, I said, I cannot give you this phone. Given my background, this is something that I'm not comfortable doing. And so she said, okay, well, I want you to open up your contacts and type in the area code 972. And so I did this, and I had 2 contacts that had the area code 972. One of them is an individual inside of Gaza who I've helped provide food and financial aid to, who's helped feed children who are orphaned inside of Gaza. And then the other one was a doctor that I've met. I honestly didn't even remember who this person was that I've met just through this movement. But and this was enough for her to think that I was pro-Palestinian, that I didn't support Israel. And so I explained to her what I just did, that I, help raise money for these people, etc. And she said, have you donated to Sudan? And I said, as a matter of fact, I have. And she said, well, what about Ukraine? And I said, yes, as a matter of fact, I've donated thousands of dollars to the Ukrainians, helped coordinate trucks coming from Yorkshire to the Poland border with baby formula. So this has always been, like, these humanitarian missions have always been a part of my life. And she was upset by this. All of these things were just like frustrating her even more. And so she started asking me about my husband's job, and I said, I can't answer these questions. And she said, well, if you're not going to answer any more questions, then this interrogation is done. And I exited out of the interrogation room, and probably about an hour later of waiting in this one area where I was detained, they came and gave me a paper saying that I was not allowed to enter into Palestine. I was being banned for 5 years, and I was a public security threat.
That's so bizarre.
Just for having a pro-Palestinian stance, for having a stance against the genocide that they're committing.
Oh, that's so bizarre. I mean, do you feel that they were like fishing to see whether you supported them more?
Yes, for sure. Oh, they asked those questions as well. The Israeli government wants to know our stance on the war. So this is a part of their interrogation. They ask, how do you feel about the war? They even asked me what I thought the solution was, of which I told them maybe the Jews should move to Florida because the governor there really loves the Jews. So maybe you guys should go to Florida. And